The rain hammered down in sheets over the sleepy town of Millbrook, Tennessee, turning the police station's windows into a blur of stormy chaos. Officer James Harris, seasoned by 15 years on the force, was used to the quiet hum of night shifts in this small Smoky Mountain town. But when a faint scratching sound broke through the monotony of paperwork, he could never have guessed the extraordinary events about to unfold. At the station door stood a wild bobcat, soaked to the bone, its piercing eyes locked with Harris's in a silent plea. It wasn't aggression or fear. It was desperation, a call for help as primal as the storm raging outside. Against every protocol, Harris made a choice: to trust what the animal was trying to tell him. What followed wasn't just a rescue mission, but a story of trust, instinct, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her young. As the officers uncovered the truth, they found themselves moved to tears by the resilience of the wild and their own ability to respond with compassion. What this bobcat led them to would leave their small town forever changed.
The night shift at Millbrook Police Department was usually as quiet as the small Tennessee town it served. Located at the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, where wilderness met civilization, the station had seen its fair share of unusual incidents over the years. But nothing quite like what would unfold on this stormy October night. Officer James Harris, a veteran of 15 years on the force, sat at his desk reviewing reports while his thoughts turned to his late wife Rachel. How all the rules and procedures were not enough to save her from her last moments of cancer, as rain drummed steadily against the windows. At 45, with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines around his eyes, he had the kind of face that put people at ease, a valuable trait in his line of work. The station was nearly empty, with only himself, Rookie Officer Sarah Harrison, and dispatch operator Mike Turner holding down the fort. Sarah, fresh out of the police academy and eager to prove herself, was organizing files in the adjacent room. At 24, she brought a youthful energy to the department that Harris found both refreshing and occasionally exhausting. Tonight, though, her enthusiasm was dampened by the mundane task of paperwork and the gloomy weather. The first scratch at the door was so faint that Harris almost missed it over the sound of rain and the antiquated heating system's steady hum. The second scratch was more insistent, followed by what sounded like a cross between a growl and a whimper. "Did you hear that?" Sarah called from the other room, her voice tinged with curiosity. Harris set down his coffee mug. "Yeah, probably just a stray cat looking to get out of the rain. Would you mind checking?" Sarah grabbed a flashlight and headed for the front entrance. The scratching grew more urgent as she approached. Through the glass door, the beam of her flashlight revealed something that made her heart skip a beat. "Officer Harris," she called out, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and amazement. "You need to see this. Now." Harris hurried to join her, hand instinctively resting on his holstered weapon. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. There, illuminated by Sarah's flashlight and the dim glow of the station's exterior lights, was a bobcat. The wild feline was soaked to the bone, its tawny fur darkened by rain and plastered against its muscular frame. But what struck Harris wasn't just the presence of the normally shy predator. It was the look in its eyes. In 15 years of law enforcement, he'd encountered plenty of wild animals. He'd seen fear, aggression, and the blank stare of creatures simply following their instincts. But the eyes that met his now held something different: desperation and what he could only describe as pleading intelligence. "That's a bobcat," Sarah stated unnecessarily, her hand also hovering near her weapon. "Sure is," Harris replied quietly, studying the animal's behavior. The bobcat wasn't displaying any signs of aggression or rabies. Instead, it scratched at the door again, then took a few steps back, watching them expectantly. Mike's voice crackled over their radios. "Everything okay up there? The security camera is showing some kind of animal." "We've got a situation here, Mike," Harris responded, "but I don't think it's dangerous. Call animal control, but tell them not to rush. Something's not right here." The bobcat continued its odd behavior, scratching at the door, backing away, then returning to scratch again. Its movements were purposeful, almost human-like in their clear intent to communicate. Harris made a decision that went against every protocol in the book. "Sarah, I'm going to open the door." "Sir?" Her eyes widened. "Are you sure that's wise?" "No," he admitted. "But look at her. And it is a her, I can tell now. She's trying to tell us something." He reached for the door handle, moving slowly and deliberately. The moment the door cracked open, the bobcat darted inside, but not aggressively. She moved with purpose, stopping a few feet away and looking back at them with that same urgent expression. "She wants us to follow her," Sarah breathed, amazement replacing fear in her voice. The bobcat led them through the station's hallways, past the break room and the evidence storage, toward a seldom-used section of the building. Harris and Sarah followed at a careful distance, their flashlight beams tracking the animal's movement. They ended up at an old storage closet, one that hadn't been used since the station's renovation 3 years ago. The bobcat scratched frantically at the door, letting out a sound that made Harris's chest tighten. It was the cry of a mother in distress. There must be a way in from outside, Sarah realized aloud. A vent or a gap in the foundation. She got her cubs in there somehow. Harris nodded, reaching for the door handle. The bobcat backed away just enough to let him open it, then rushed inside. Their flashlights revealed a scene that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. In the corner, nestled in what appeared to be an old emergency blanket that had been stored there and forgotten, lay 3 tiny bobcat cubs. They were barely moving, their small bodies wet and cold. The mother bobcat stood over them, making soft mewling sounds as she nudged them with her nose. "They're freezing," Harris said, his voice thick with emotion. The storm must have flooded wherever she had them hidden. She brought them here looking for shelter. Without hesitation, Sarah shrugged off her jacket and reached for the cubs. The mother bobcat watched intently but made no move to stop her, an extraordinary display of trust that wasn't lost on either officer. "Mike," Harris called into his radio, "cancel animal control. Get Dr. Martinez on the phone instead." Elena Martinez was the local veterinarian who occasionally assisted the department with injured wildlife. "Tell her it's an emergency." The next few hours transformed the Millbrook Police Department into an impromptu wildlife rescue center. Dr. Martinez arrived within 20 minutes, her silver hair still mussed from sleep, but her dark eyes alert and focused. She quickly set up a makeshift examination area in the break room, laying out her medical supplies with practiced efficiency. "This is remarkable," she said as she checked each cub, her gentle hands examining their tiny bodies while the mother bobcat watched from a few feet away. "I've never seen anything like it." This mother knew exactly what she was doing. She sought out human help deliberately. The cubs, all males, were hypothermic but otherwise healthy. Dr. Martinez showed the officers how to warm them gradually using heating pads and towels. The mother bobcat remained calm throughout the process, her eyes never leaving her babies, but showing no aggression toward the humans helping them. Word spread quickly through the small department, and by dawn, several off-duty officers had arrived to help. Among them was Chief Robert Wilson, a barrel-chested man in his 50s who had seen just about everything in his 30 years of service. Even he stood in amazement watching the scene unfold in his break room. "Would you look at that?" he murmured, shaking his head as Sarah bottle-fed the weakest cub while the mother bobcat lay nearby, seemingly content to let the young officer help. "In all my years." The story of the bobcat family quickly spread through Millbrook. Local news crews gathered outside the station, but Chief Wilson kept them at bay, knowing the animals needed peace and quiet. Instead, he allowed the department's social media manager to document the rescue effort, sharing updates that soon went viral. Dr. Martinez stayed through the morning, monitoring the cubs' recovery. "They're getting stronger," she announced around noon, her tired face breaking into a smile. The mother's quick thinking and your fast action saved their lives. The mother bobcat, whom the officers had started calling Luna, showed no desire to leave the station even as her cubs improved. She seemed to understand they were safe there, accepting food and water from the officers with surprising domesticity while maintaining her wild dignity. Harris found himself working a double shift, unable to leave until he knew the family would be okay. He sat in a chair near the break room, watching Sarah interact with the cubs while Luna looked on. The rookie officer had shown remarkable intuition throughout the night, her gentle approach winning the trust of both mother and babies. "You know," Sarah said quietly, cradling the smallest cub as he suckled from a bottle, "when I joined the force, I thought I'd be catching bad guys and solving crimes. Never imagined I'd be playing nursemaid to baby bobcats." Harris smiled. "That's the thing about this job. Sometimes the most important work we do has nothing to do with law enforcement. Sometimes it's just about being there when someone needs help, even if that someone has 4 legs and fur." As the day progressed, Dr. Martinez began making plans for the family's future. "They can't stay here forever," she explained to the gathered officers. "Once the cubs are stronger, they'll need to return to the wild. But we have to do it properly." She outlined a plan to transfer them to a wildlife rehabilitation center in the Smokies, where they could be monitored while maintaining minimal human contact. The center had experience with bobcats and could ensure the family would be released in a safe area once the cubs were old enough to survive on their own. The news brought mixed emotions to the department. Everyone had grown attached to their unusual guests, but they knew returning them to the wild was the right thing to do. Even Luna seemed to sense the shifting mood, becoming more alert and protective of her cubs as they grew stronger. That evening, as Harris prepared to finally head home, he made one last check on the Bobcat family. Luna was curled around her cubs, all 3 now actively nursing and squirming with healthy energy. She raised her head as he approached, meeting his gaze with those remarkable eyes that had first captured his attention. "You did good, Mama," he told her softly. "You did real good." The transfer to the wildlife center took place 2 days later. The cubs had grown stronger by the hour, and Luna had become increasingly restless, her wild nature reasserting itself as the emergency passed. Dr. Martinez supervised as the family was carefully loaded into a specialized transport carrier. The entire department gathered to say goodbye, many officers fighting back tears as they watched the carrier being loaded into the wildlife center's van. Sarah stood next to Harris, wiping her eyes unabashedly. "They're going to be okay, right?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. Harris nodded, his own throat tight with emotion. "They're going to be just fine. Luna knew what she was doing when she chose us, and she knows what she's doing now. Those cubs couldn't ask for a better mother." The Wildlife Center kept their promise to send regular updates. The department's social media pages shared photos and videos of the family's progress, and their story continued to touch hearts across the country. Luna and her cubs became symbols of the extraordinary bonds that can form between humans and wildlife, and of the importance of compassion in law enforcement. 3 months later, on a crisp winter morning, Harris and Sarah joined a small group at the Wildlife Center to witness the family's release. The cubs had grown into healthy young bobcats, their spotted coats gleaming in the sunlight. Luna, sleek and powerful, emerged from the transport cage first, scanning the forest before calling her cubs to follow. As the family disappeared into the trees, Sarah turned to Harris with tears in her eyes. "Do you think she'll remember us?" Harris watched the spot where the bobcats had vanished, remembering that stormy night and the desperate mother who had trusted them against all odds. "I think some things you never forget," he replied. "I know I won't." 5 years passed since Luna and her cubs returned to the wild, but their impact on Millbrook continued to ripple outward like waves on a still pond. Officer James Harris, now the department's wildlife response coordinator, had developed one of the most successful police wildlife programs in the Southeast. The initiative, dubbed Project Luna, had become a model for other rural departments dealing with the increasing intersection of human and wildlife populations. Sarah Harrison, no longer a rookie but a decorated officer, had thrown herself into wildlife conservation work alongside her regular duties. She'd earned her wildlife rehabilitation certification and spent her off-duty hours volunteering at the same center that had helped Luna's family. The quiet, determined rookie had blossomed into a confident leader, often conducting training sessions for other departments looking to implement similar programs. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 5 years after Luna first scratched at their door, Harris sat in his office reviewing reports when Sarah burst in, her face flushed with excitement. "They found her," she announced, holding up her phone. "The wildlife researchers in the Smokies. They're sure it's Luna this time." Harris leaned forward, his heart racing. Over the years, there had been several possible sightings, but nothing definitive. How can they be sure? Sarah placed her phone on his desk, showing him footage from a research camera. The bobcat in the image was older but unmistakable, with the same distinctive markings they'd come to know so well. But what made Harris's breath catch was what followed her, not 2, but 5 young bobcats. She had another litter, Sarah explained, her voice thick with emotion. And look at these 2. She pointed to 2 larger bobcats flanking the group. The researchers think these are her original cubs, now fully grown. They've stayed together, formed a family group. It's extremely unusual behavior for bobcats, but then again, Luna always was special. The discovery coincided with another milestone in Millbrook. The department was preparing to open its new Wildlife Response Center, a dedicated facility attached to the police station but specifically designed for treating injured or distressed wildlife. The project, funded through a combination of government grants and community donations, had grown from the simple care station they'd created after Luna's visit. Dr. Martinez, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, had been instrumental in the center's design. Luna taught us that sometimes the wild things know exactly where to go for help, she'd said during the planning stages. We just need to be ready when they come. The night before the center's official opening, Harris found himself walking the familiar path to the small grave behind the station. The marker stone had weathered with time, but hope remained clearly visible, a testament to the tiny life that had touched so many. He often came here to think, to remember, to talk to his late wife, Rachel. You would have loved all this, he said softly, touching the stone. The center, the program, everything that grew from that night. I think maybe you had a hand in it, somehow. You and this little one here. A sound made him turn. In the gathering dusk, at the edge of the woods, stood a bobcat. For a moment, his heart stopped. The animal watched him with familiar amber eyes, and though logic told him it couldn't be Luna, the location was too far from her known territory. Something in those eyes spoke of recognition. The bobcat held his gaze for a long moment, then melted away into the forest as silently as she had appeared. Harris stood motionless, tears rolling down his cheeks, feeling touched by something beyond explanation. The Wildlife Response Center's opening ceremony drew coverage from national media outlets interested in this unusual collaboration between law enforcement and wildlife conservation. Harris, uncomfortable in the spotlight but understanding the importance of publicity for the program's future, gave a brief speech. 5 years ago, a mother's desperate trust changed not just our department, but our entire community's relationship with the wild world around us, he told the assembled crowd. She taught us that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come in simple things like asking for help when you need it most. The center's main treatment room was dedicated to Luna, with a large photograph of her and her cubs displayed prominently on the wall. Below it, in elegant script, was written, "For those who find their way to our door." Next to it hung a smaller frame containing a pressed flower from his wife's memorial service, connecting the 2 threads of love and loss that had woven together to create something new and healing. As Harris looked around at all they had accomplished, Sarah demonstrating emergency wildlife care techniques to visiting officers, Dr. Martinez training a new generation of veterinary volunteers, Chief Wilson proudly showing off the state-of-the-art facilities, he felt a deep sense of peace. The hollow emptiness that had consumed him after his wife's death had been filled with purpose, with connection, with a different kind of love. The center's first patient arrived even before the ceremony ended, a young deer injured in a collision with a car. Harris watched as his team sprang into action, their movements confident and coordinated, their faces showing the same combination of determination and compassion he'd seen that stormy night with Luna. Later that evening, as he prepared to head home, Harris found Sarah standing in front of Luna's photograph. "Do you think she knew?" Sarah asked quietly. "That night, when she chose our door to scratch on, do you think she knew she wasn't just saving her cubs, but all of us too?" Harris thought about the bobcat he'd seen by the grave, about Rachel, about the mysterious ways life had of bringing healing to broken places. "I think," he said slowly, "that love knows things we can't explain. Whether it's a mother's love for her cubs or a husband's love for his wife." Sarah finished gently. He nodded, touching the frame that held his wife's flower. "Luna taught me that grief doesn't end, but but it can transform. It can become something that helps others, that builds bridges, that creates sanctuary for those in need. The years continued to pass, and the Wildlife Response Center flourished. Stories of its success spread, inspiring similar programs across the country. Harris received letters from other officers who'd lost loved ones and found healing in wildlife work, each one reminding him of the extraordinary ways Luna's legacy continued to grow. The wildlife researchers in the Smokies kept tracking Luna and her unusual family group, documenting how they'd carved out a territory that defied typical bobcat behavior. Her original cubs had stayed nearby, helping to raise their younger siblings, creating a complex social structure more reminiscent of lions than solitary bobcats. They'd adapted, evolved, found a new way of being that worked for them, just as Harris and the department had done. On rainy nights, Harris would sometimes sit in his office at the center, listening to the drumming of water against windows and remembering. The grief was still there, a quiet companion rather than the crushing weight it had once been. His wife's absence remained a constant, but it had become entwined with purpose, with the presence of all the wild lives they'd helped save, with the community they'd built. And sometimes, in the deepest part of night when the rain fell heaviest, he could swear he heard scratching at the door. Each time, he would rise and check, ready to help whatever creature had found its way to them. Because that was Luna's greatest lesson, that trust, given and received, could bridge any gap, heal any heart, and light the way home through the darkest of nights. The legacy of a mother's desperate trust continued to grow, touching lives both wild and human, a testament to the extraordinary things that can happen when love finds exactly the right door to scratch on. And somewhere in the misty heights of the Smoky Mountains, Luna's family continued to thrive, carrying with them a story of how the boundaries between wild and tame, between grief and healing, between loss and love, were far more fluid than anyone had ever imagined.